Right, hi, hello everyone, and welcome to the Diesel Arsenal channel. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. And tonight we've got a great show for you. We're going to talk about who was the Jack the Ripper, so that should be interesting. There's a lot of suspects, and as I'm sure you're all aware, um, there's quite a few different um, poor victims as well. So it should be quite interesting. So please make sure you put a like on the video for Diesel for me. If you could do that, that would be absolutely fantastic. And if you're new to his channel, please make sure you subscribe. Anyway, so let's get into it. This is what we're going to be talking about. Why is Jack the Ripper so famous? London in the 19th century, poverty in Whitechapel, because that was the area of London where he operated, where the name Jack the Ripper came from, the victim profiles, the murders, the canonical five hallmarks of a Jack the Ripper murder, the victims, the investigation, Jack the Ripper offender profile, suspects, my thoughts, and the unveiling of who I believe may have been Jack the Ripper. So before we get started fully into it, I'm just going to introduce the people who are in the chat, the lovely, absolute legends that you all are. And we got Joanne Smith, and she's saying, "Hello, Warren, my lovelies." Hi, Joanne. I hope you're good. I hope those cats are well, including Warren. Lovely looking fella, if you ask me. Your cat, you named him after me. I didn't have to do that, but yeah, I'm really proud that you did that. James Steele says, "Evening, bloody hot." I'm guessing that's a shocked emoji, but I'm not sure. And then Arsenal since 1987. Warren, this is going to be one ripper of a show. Yeah, I hope so, man. I really do. So, without any further ado, we've said hello to everyone, got everyone settled. They've got their popcorn and their drinks. So, let's get into it. So, Whitechapel, circa 1800. We'll get into that in just a second. Now, um, Jack the Ripper was a serial killer active in and around East London, and in particular, the impoverished and deprived Whitechapel district of London in England. He, it seems, was never ever brought to justice. Now, Jack the Ripper became one of the world's most famous unsolved serial killers in history, and it is believed that anywhere between 5 and 11 women may have fallen victim to him. And Ange B has just come into the chat. She says, "Good evening, Warren and Chatty Chat." Hi, Ange. I hope you're well, and I hope you have a great evening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for joining. Excuse me, sorry. Thanks for joining the show, and please, everyone, make sure you put a like on the video for Diesel and I. That'd be absolutely fantastic if you could do that. Right. So on we go. So one of the strangest things about this case is the fact that each body seems to have been missing vital organs when the police found the victim. And these five murders are commonly known. The ones that are most commonly attached to Jack the Ripper are commonly known as the canonical five. So let's move on to talk about London in the late 19th century. So, between the mid 19th century and the end of the 19th century, London saw an influx of people from a variety of sources, including Jewish refugees fleeing the Russian Empire and other parts of Eastern Europe. And it also claimed it's also been claimed that Britain's major cities, including the East End of London, also saw large scale immigration from Ireland from around 1840 due to the Great Famine. But it's also been claimed that immigrants had been coming to Britain well before then. In fact, it should be it should be noted that Ireland saw its population fall by at least 2 million at this time. And then by 1888, the parish of Whitechapel in the East End of London had become increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 people. And as a consequence, work and housing conditions worsened and a significant economic underclass developed. So at this time, 50% of children born in the East End died before they were 5 years old. And robbery, violence, alcohol dependency had become commonplace in the 19th century. And in this environment, because of widespread poverty, many women were driven into prostitution. And in October 1888, police in London believed that there were as many 62 brothels and 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel. So let's carry on. And Ange B says, have hit the like. Thank you so much, Ange. That's wonderful. That's really great. It's really important for YouTubers that whenever you go to a show, you hit the like button because it helps with the algorithm. And when you do that, it sends the video out to more and more people. So thank you so much for that. Pepsi Pack's in the chat. Hi, Pepsi Pack. I hope you're well. Hope you're having a great evening. Thanks for joining us. And he says, Jack the Ripper is similar to Terry. They can't be found. No, that's very true. I do believe that Diesel was having some issues trying to locate Terry. He's like East London's version of Lord Lucan, I think. Yeah, so on we go. So Whitechapel, because of its acute levels of poverty among its population, also suffered a huge housing crisis, with approximately 8.5 people residing in the 233 common lodging houses. Common lodging houses is a Victorian. Common lodging houses was a Victorian era term for a form of cheap accommodation in which the inhabitants, who were not necessarily all from one family, all lived together in the same room or rooms, whether for eating or sleeping. The slang terms doss house, British English, and flop house, North American English, are roughly equivalent of common lodging houses. Probably the nearest modern day equivalent to a common lodging house is a hostel. Yeah, that's probably a really good description because I've stayed in a hostel, when I was a lot younger, and it was like that. You used to have a number of beds in one room, and there'd be several people sharing the room. Some of them you knew, some of you didn't. That's what it was like. Pepsi Pack says he hit the like button too. Thanks, Pepsi. That's fantastic stuff. Brilliant. Good man. Thank you. Taib's in the chat and he's saying, hi, Warren. Did Jack rip those women? Some new ones. Laugh out loud. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but yeah, I know what you're like. So that was really funny. And Taib says, smash the likes up. Yep, 100%. Please make sure you do that. Please make sure you hit that like button. And also, if you're new, please make sure you subscribe to Diesel's channel, Diesel Arsenal. And also, please make sure that you do that with my channel, Warren's Team Talk. That's where I'm from. Come and do these shows on Diesel's channel every once in a while. Yeah, it's great fun. So I hope you enjoy it. I did one previously. The one I did last time was Jill Dando, about who murdered her and whatnot. So yeah, but please make sure you subscribe to Diesel's channel. He's an absolute top man, absolute legend. His videos are like unbelievable. He can just talk and talk and talk. He doesn't come in here with a script like I am. I'm sitting here and I've got half the screen with the software so that I can do this stream for you. And then the other half of the screen, I've got a Word document open with everything I want to say in the show, because otherwise I wouldn't remember like 1% of it. It's just because I'm getting old now and my memory is shocking. So yeah, please make sure you subscribe to Diesel's channel. Honestly, his videos are elite and of an elite level, and he's a really, really top guy. He knows what he's talking about. He talks 100% facts all the time, and he's 100% honest. And what you see with Diesel is what you get. I've spoken to him offline, and he's exactly the same there as what he's on here. And it's a pleasure for me to come and do this for him, and I really enjoy it. So yeah, he talks on his channel about Arsenal. He gets me on here to do this stuff. He talks about life and all sorts of different things, not just about football. So make sure you go and check him out. Right. Okay. So, and Pepsi Pack says, just subscribed to Warren's Team Talk. Thank you, Pepsi Pack. Top man. That's really kind of you. Thank you. Ange B, Jill Dando, and great insight to her murder. Thank you very much, and I'm glad you enjoyed that one. Pepsi Pack says AFTV 100% BS. Yeah, you won't get an argument out of me about that. And Taib Hussain says, Warren, what was the total number of victims of Jack the Ripper? Anywhere between 5 and about 11 or 12, mate. That was what it was. So anyway, let's move on. So the economic and social problems in Whitechapel were accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions, and between 1886 and 1889, there were frequent demonstrations which led to police intervention and public unrest, such as Bloody Sunday in 1887, which was when a crowd of marchers, some of whom were armed with iron bars, knives, pokers, and gas pipes, protested about unemployment and a number of other issues, clashed violently with the Metropolitan Police. Some reports from the time suggest that as many as 400 people were arrested and 75 were badly injured, including many police, with 2 policemen being stabbed and 1 protester being bayoneted. These social problems, along with the issues of anti-Semitism, get my tongue around this in a minute, anti-Semitism, I can't say the word, basically the thing where people are anti-Jewish people, that's what I'm trying to say, but I just can't say it. I can't get my tongue around it. Anti-Semitism, crime, nativism, which is the political policy of promoting or protecting the interests of native, indigenous, or established inhabitants over those of immigrants, and the support of immigration restriction measures, racism, and social disturbance influenced the image that the area had been a notorious den of immorality, and this image was only strengthened in the autumn of 1888 when the series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. Now, let's move on. So, in the autumn of 1888, both criminal case files and the journalistic reports of the day, the killer known to history as Jack the Ripper was originally called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron because it is alleged he always wore a leather apron. The name Jack the Ripper, though, arose later after a letter named Dear Boss, the Dear Boss letter, was sent to the Central News Agency of London, which was dated the 25th September 1888, in which the author of the letter claimed to be Jack the Ripper, and it is believed that this letter was the first correspondence to be signed by someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper and was widely circulated in the press. It is widely believed that the letter was a hoax and it is felt that the letter may have been written by journalists in an effort to try and heighten interest in the story and increase their newspaper's circulation. So the victims of Jack the Ripper attacks were typically women working as prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. And the thing that all the victims had in common was that would have had their throats cut, and then the attacker would carry out abdominal mutilations. There was also widespread speculation that the removal of internal organs from at least 3 of these victims meant that the killer had had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. So let's go in here because there's Taib says, what was the time span of these murders? Was it a regular occurrence or spaced out? Well, there were 2 murders that happened on the same evening, but it was about, I'd say from what I can see, it was about 6 months, something like that. But we'll get more into that in a little while, Ty. Don't worry about that, mate. At this time, it is believed that the attacks against women in the East End of London were very common, and so forth. This makes it very difficult to say with any degree of certainty how many victims were of the same individual. In fact, it seems that between the 3rd of April 1888 to 13th February 1891, that 11 separate murders were included in the police investigation, which were collectively known as the Whitechapel murders. There appears to be some debate as to whether all the murders can be linked to the same culprit, but it is believed that at least 5 of the murders, known as the Canonical Five, were the work of Jack the Ripper. So, as you can see here in the slide, there's pictures of all the Canonical Five. The Canonical Five were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. These murders took place between the 31st of August and 9th of November 1888. And these are the murders which are most widely considered to be the most likely to be carried out by the character who became known as Jack the Ripper. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore, and pseudo-history, capturing public imagination to the present day. Also, I'd just like to point out as well that in around Whitechapel area, you can do like their walking tours. You can go around and see the locations of where these murders took place and stuff like that. If that's your bag, it's not my bag, but I know that some people like that sort of thing. Ashby has come in the chat since she's saying failed surgeon who was obviously insane. It's highly it's possibly could be that, and 100%. Joanne Smith says, "Oh, you're on yay." Yeah, exactly. Taiva Sen says, "Hi, Joanne. How are your cats doing?" Yes, exactly. How are the cats? I'm not entirely sure what is meant by this term, the canonical, but I have been led to believe that it may refer to a group which is approved, authentic, or official, which I guess is why the 5 murders that are known as the Canonical Five are those murders which have been accepted as being carried out by Jack the Ripper. In September and October of 1888, rumours that the murders were connected and were the work of a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper started to intensify when numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals who claimed to be the murderer, media coverage of the crimes, and also because of the extraordinary brutal nature of the murders. And we've got Tony Abira in the chat. Says, "Hey Warren, I hope you're well, buddy." Yeah, I'm not too bad, thanks, mate. Thanks for asking. Ty says, sorry, and Tony, thanks ever so much for tuning in. I hope you're going to enjoy this one. So yeah, but lovely to see you, man. Thanks ever so much for popping in. Taib says, Tony, brother, how are you? And Joanne says, hi, Taib. The cats are okay. The kittens, Ozzy and Warren, are having a mad moment. Laugh out loud. Well, if it's anything like that, it's not an uncommon thing. It's probably got something to do with the name. Right. So one such example of the letters that I mentioned earlier was the From Hell letter, which was delivered with half a preserved human kidney, purportedly taken from one of the victims. And the From Hell letter was received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which was a group of volunteer citizens in the East End of London who patrolled the streets looking for suspicious-looking characters, partly because of the dissatisfaction with the failure of the police to apprehend the murderer, and also because some members were concerned that the murders were affecting businesses in the area. Right. So, the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee petitioned the government to raise a reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer, and they also offered their own reward of £50, which in those days that would have been equivalent of between £5,900 and £86,000 in 2021 for information leading to his capture. And in addition, they also hired private detectives to question witnesses independently. Now, most experts believe that the hallmarks of a typical Jack the Ripper murder were deep slash wounds to the throat, followed by extensive abdominal and genital area mutilation, the removal of internal organs, and progressive facial mutilations. The extensive newspaper coverage of the murders, the international notoriety that built up around the murders, and the Ripper helped to solidify the legend. A police investigation into a series of 11 brutal murders committed in Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891, which became known collectively as the Whitechapel murders, was unable to connect all the killings conclusively to the murders of 1888. So let's move on. And Taib says, Warren, do you want to adopt one of Joanne's kittens? I promise it won't be a catastrophe. Laugh out loud. I'm sure it wouldn't be, but no, I'm not in a position to be able to take on a pet, mate, unfortunately. I think that would be an act of cruelty if someone was to do that. Anyway, so of the 11 murders collectively known as the Whitechapel murders, the first two victims were not part of the canonical five, meaning that they are not widely accepted as being part of the group of victims who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. And the victims are, and you can see where all the first 7 Whitechapel murders took place there. And these victims are number one, Emma Smith. She was born circa 1843 and died April 4th, 1888. She was murdered at 1:30 a.m. on the 3rd of April, 1888. She was a prostitute, and her life prior to being assaulted and murdered is shrouded by mystery. All that is known about her previous life is that what she told people was that she was a widow, and that more than 10 years before she had left her husband, she had broken away from all her early associations. It was reported by those who knew her that she had a demeanor of class about her, which was apparent from the way that she spoke, which was uncommon in others of her class. Once Emma was asked why she had broken away so completely from her old life, she replied a little wistfully, "They would not understand now any more than they understood then. I must live somehow." She was robbed and then sexually assaulted before being murdered in Osborne Street in Whitechapel at approximately 1:30 a.m. on the 3rd of April 1888. It is believed that she was bludgeoned about the face and her ear had a cut, and she was sexually assaulted with a blunt object, and the following day she died in hospital. It has been reported that Smith claimed she had been attacked by 2 and 3 men, and one of them she described as being a teenager. It is widely believed that Smith may have been one of the Ripper's victims, but he's also felt that a murder may have been due to general East End gang violence and completely unrelated to the Ripper case. So, who have we got in here now? So, Taib says there was an American prostitute that was murdered with an axe to their head. The police knew who the culprit was, but still let him get away with it. That's shocking. That really is. If they knew the person was, that's terrible, Taib. Oregon Gooner is in the chat. Hi, Oregon Gooner. How are you? I hope you're well, mate. Nice to see you, buddy. And he's saying, big up, Warren, in the chat. The same to you, my friend. And Taib and Oregon Gooner are both saying hello to each other there. That's nice to see. Okay, so let's move on. Number 2, Martha Tabram. She was born the 10th of May, 1849, and she died on the 7th of August, 1888. Martha was born as Martha White, as the youngest of 5 children, on the 10th of May, 1849, in Southwark in London. On Christmas Day, 1869, Martha was married, and by December 1872, her and her husband had 2 children. Sadly, the marriage was a troubled one, mostly because of Martha's drinking, which was heavy enough to cause alcoholic fits, and by 1875, her husband left her. However, this did not curtail Martha's drinking, and it would not be uncommon for her to stay out all night. Eventually, Martha's economic situation became so bad that she was forced into prostitution. Martha Tabram was murdered on a staircase landing in George Yard, Whitechapel, on the 7th of August 1888. Although it is widely accepted by historians that she is not one of the canonical 5, however, it is believed that out of all the non-canonical 5 victims, she is the most likely to be a Jack the Ripper victim. It is claimed that she suffered 39 stab wounds to her throat, lungs, heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and abdomen, as well as additional knife wounds inflicted to her breasts and vagina, but it's believed that she wasn't raped. The savagery of the Tabram murder, along with the lack of obvious motive and the geographical closeness of the location and date to the later canonical Ripper murders, this led the police to link this murder to those later committed by Jack the Ripper. However, this murder differs from the later canonical Jack the Ripper murders because she did not suffer any slash wounds to her throat or abdomen, and this appears to be the major reason that her case was included as one of the canonical was not included as one of the canonical murders. So here we go. Joanne saying, I officially own 6 cats and 2 kittens. See, yeah, there you go. See, Joanne is the cat woman of Norfolk. She's unbelievable. She's got 8 cats living with her. Absolutely superb stuff, Joanne. I really respect that. Brilliant stuff. Anthony Herbert says, big up, Ron. I do like the stories about Jack the Ripper. Mate, these stories are wild. It's shocking. It really is, wasn't it? When I was putting this show together, it was quite hard, really, because it was just so disturbed. Some of the stuff's like quite disturbing and dark. And Taib says, Anthony, good evening, bro. How are you today? Anthony says, I'm good, Taib. Hope you're good too. Yeah, and Anthony, thanks ever so much for tuning in, man. I hope you enjoy the show. I'm sure it's going to be really interesting and informative, I hope. James Steele says, I live near Whitechapel. Some of the streets are the same as back then in the 1880s. Jeez. Dear me, that's shocking. But it's nice to see you, James. I hope you're well, mate. Thanks for tuning in. It's good to see you. And Ange B says kitties rule. Yes, they most certainly do. I think they think that we are their pets, not the other way around. They really are. They rule the roost, as they say. Okay, so let's move on. So the next one up is Mary Ann Nichols, Polly Nichols, nee Walker. She was born on the 26th of August, 1845, and she died on the 31st of August, 1888. Mary Ann Nichols was born Mary Ann Walker on the 26th of August, 1845. She was the second of three children born to Edward Walker, a locksmith, later a blacksmith, and Caroline Nee Webb, a laundress. Little is known of her early life, and she was married on the 16th of January 1864 at the tender age of 18, and she had 5 children with her husband. Towards the end of 1880, she separated from her husband. The reason for the separation seems to be disputed, with Mary Ann's father claiming that her partner had an affair with the nurse who had attended the birth of their final child's birth, and her partner saying it was because of Mary Ann's heavy drinking and that she was practicing prostitution. Over the following years, Nichols amassed a lengthy police record. All of her arrests were for minor offences such as drunkenness, disorderly conduct, and prostitution. After 1881, she lived in workhouses. A workhouse was a place which provided accommodation and employment opportunities for people who were not able to support themselves, boarding houses, and even sleeping rough in Trafalgar Square for a short period. By the summer of 31st of August, Charles Allen Cross discovered what he initially believed to be a tarpaulin laying on the ground in front of a gated stable entrance in Bucks Row, renamed Duard Street in 1892, Whitechapel, as he walked to his place of employment in Broad Street and was close to what is now known as Royal London Hospital. Upon inspecting the object, Cross discovered the tarpaulin was actually the body of a woman who was laying on her back with her eyes open and her legs straight, her skirt raised above her knees, and her left hand touching the gate of the stable entrance. A surgeon by the name of Dr. Lewin came and inspected the body and quickly pronounced that she was dead and that she had 2 deep knife wounds to her throat. And on further inspection, the surgeon found that her vagina had been stabbed twice and her abdomen had been mutilated with 1 deep, jagged wound, 2 or 3 inches from the left side. Several incisions had also been inflicted across her abdomen, causing her bowels to protrude through the wounds, and 3 or 4 similar cuts ran down the right side of her body. These cuts had also been inflicted by the same knife, estimated to be at least 6 to 8 inches long, and possibly a cork cutter or shoemaker's knife with a violent and downward thrusting manner. The surgeon, after examining the body, was of the belief that the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. However, no organs were missing. Right, so let's see. We've got Joanne's come in again, says, on my road at Pyhern Mews, we have a black cat called Diesel, and now I called one Warren. Oh, well, there you go. That's it, you see. 26, Annie Chapman. Annie Chapman, who was born Eliza Ann Smith, was the second canonical victim of the notorious unidentified serial killer named Jack the Ripper. Although previous murders linked to Jack the Ripper, then known as the Whitechapel Murderer, had received considerable press and public attention, the murder of Annie Chapman generated a state of panic in the East End of London, with police under increasing pressure to apprehend the culprit. Annie Chapman, also known as Dark Annie, was the first of the five children. Was the first of five children, and her father was a soldier. And Annie's early life centered on the location of her father's military service in London. Excuse me. Sorry about that. In London and Windsor. It has been reported that Annie, from an early age, enjoyed alcoholic drinks, and despite the best ever efforts of her family, she quickly became alcohol dependent. She was also described as being a very civil, sociable, and intelligent woman, and when she was sober, she was known as being very industrious. She married on the 1st of May 1869, and the couple had three children, two girls and a boy. In 1884, Annie and her husband separated by mutual consent, and initially she lived off her weekly allowance from her ex-husband. However, when this ended after he died in 1886 and her partner at the time left her, it seems that her mental health deteriorated, and it has been reported that she lost her will to live. By June 1888, Annie was living in a lodging house in Dorset Street, which had the reputation for being the worst street in London, which she paid for with the income that she made from crochet and other handicraft work, and also occasional prostitution. On the 8th of September 1888 at 5:30 a.m. in Spitalfields, it is alleged that Annie Chapman was seen talking with a man who was described as being over 40 years old, slightly taller than Chapman, and with dark hair. He was also described as wearing a brown low-crowned felt hat, and possibly a dark coat. It is also alleged that this man asked Annie Chapman the question, "Will you?" To which Annie Chapman is alleged replied yes. So the mutilated body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m. by an elderly resident named John Davies near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street and Spitalfields. 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. As in the case of Mary Ann Nichols, who incidentally had been murdered just 1 week earlier, the throat was severed by two deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, with a section of flesh from her stomach being placed on her left shoulder, and another section of skin and flesh, plus her small intestines, being removed and placed above her right shoulder. Chapman's autopsy also revealed that other intimate body parts had also been removed. A leather apron, partially submerged in a dish of water located to a tap, was also discovered close to her body. Right, so on we go. So Elizabeth Stride, she was born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter on the 27th of November 1843 in Stora Telmhed, which is a village to the west of Gothenburg in Sweden. She was the second of four children born to Swedish farmer Gustaf Eriksson and his wife Beata Karlsdotter. Elizabeth Stride is believed to have been the third victim of the so-called canonical five of the mysterious Jack the Ripper. She was also known as Long Liz. This nickname, it is believed, refers either to her height, a general facial structure, or is a reference to a long stride that she may have had. And unlike the other canonical Ripper victims, Stride had not been mutilated following a murder, which has led some people to question whether she was a victim of Jack the Ripper. However, Stride's murder occurred less than 1 hour before the murder of the Ripper's fourth canonical victim, Catherine Eddowes, and was within walking distance of the location of Eddowes' murder site. It is also believed that the person who was responsible for murdering Elizabeth Stride had been disturbed in the act by someone entering the crime scene upon a two-wheeled car. It is a fact that Miss Stride, in common with the other canonical victims, have been murdered by slash wounds to the throat, which is why it's alleged that she has been categorized as being part of the canonical five, and it is also deemed to be the third of the canonical five victims. However, unlike the other canonical victims, she did not move into prostitution due to poverty. Following failed marriages, she became a prostitute much earlier in life, as can be seen by Gothenburg police records, which show that she was arrested in March 1865 for prostitution. After moving to London in February 1866, Elizabeth married John Thomas Stride, and on the 7th of March 1869, after moving to London in February 1866, Elizabeth married John Thomas Stride, who on the 7th of March 1869, who was a ship's carpenter from Sheerness, who was 22 years her senior, and throughout their marriage, the couple never had any children. By 1877, Stride had been admitted to the popular workhouse, which tends to suggest that the couple had separated by this point. After 1885, she had an on-off relationship with local dock labourer Michael Kidney, and during the times that she wasn't living with Kidney, she lived in local lodging houses. On the 26th of September 1888, after Stride and Kidney had split up yet again, Stride took up residence at 32 Flower and Dean Street, which at the time was a notorious slum and criminal rookery. A rookery in the 18th and 19th century was a city slum occupied by poor people and frequently also by criminals and prostitutes. On the 30th of September at 12:35 a.m., PC William Smith saw Stride with a man wearing a hard felt hat standing opposite the Jewish International Working Men's Educational Club, a socialist and predominantly Jewish social club of 40 Berner Street, since renamed Henrique Street in Whitechapel. And then between 12:35 and 12:45, Docker James Brown also saw a woman he believed to be Stride standing with her back against the wall at the corner of Berner Street, speaking with a man of average build in a long black coat. Brown heard Stride say, "No, not tonight, some other night." Then Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. on Sunday, the 30th of September, 1888, in the adjacent Duffel's Yard by Louis Diemschultz, who was the steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club. Diemschultz had driven into the poorly illuminated yard with his horse and two-wheeled cart when his horse abruptly shied to the left to avoid what appeared to be a bundle laying upon the ground. Diemschultz successfully attempted to lift what he described as a dark object which was laying on the ground with his whip handle before leaving his cart to inspect it. Upon lighting a match, Diemschultz saw a body lying prostrate on the floor. He immediately ran inside the club to check his wife was safe. After finding her safe and sound, he reported his discovery. Blood was still flowing from a single knife wound inflicted to Stride's neck. and although her hands were cold to the touch, other sections of her body were either slightly or quite warm. This suggests that Stride was killed shortly before Dimesholt's arrival in the yard. The first doctor to arrive at the murder scene was Frederick William Blackwell, and police surgeon Dr. George Baxter Phillips, who had examined the body of previous Whitechapel murder victim Annie Chapman, arrived about 10 minutes later. Blackwell felt that Stride's murderer may have pulled her backwards onto the ground by a neckerchief, as its bow was observed to be markedly tight before cutting her throat. Dr. Phillips concurred with this opinion, stating that Stride had probably been lying on her back when she was killed by a single swift slash wound from a single swift slash wound from her left to right across her neck, strongly indicating her murderer had been right-handed. Bruising on Stride's chest suggested that she had been pinned to the ground prior to the wound to her neck being inflicted. As it is also widely believed that the murder was committed by the infamous Jack the Ripper. However, unlike at least 3 other murder victims, whose murders it is believed were carried out by Jack the Ripper, this victim did not sustain the extensive abdominal injuries that the others had done. And then, in addition, Stride had received no mutilation injuries, with the sole injury being a deep cut measuring 2.5 inches beneath her jaw. Right, so here we go. Before we talk about Catherine Eddowes, Joanne says, I've read that one. Tybe says, Warren, make sure you sleep well tonight. We're going to run out of how many times you have yawned in stream. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. I'll take your advice for that. Thank you. Joseph O'Hanlon says, big up, Warren. Big up to you as well, Joseph. I hope you're well, mate. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you're enjoying the show, despite all my yawning. Sorry about that, Taib. Catherine Eddowes says it was believed that Catherine Eddowes was the 4th of the so-called canonical 5 victims. Catherine was born in Graiseley Green in Wolverhampton on the 14th of April 1842, and she was the 6th of 12 children born to tinplate worker George Eddowes and his wife Catherine Nee Evans, he worked as a cook, and she worked as a cook at the Peacock Hotel. Her and her family moved to London a year after Eddowes was born. In 1857, when she was just 15, both of Eddowes' parents had died. So then she and 3 of her siblings were admitted as orphans to a Bermondsey workhouse. Catherine Eddowes was described by her friends as being a very jolly woman who was always singing, and she was intelligent and a scholarly person, but she had a fierce and fiery temper. While she was living in Birmingham, she started a relationship with a former soldier known as Thomas Conway, and in 1868 they moved to London and took up lodgings in Westminster. In 1881, she was living with her second partner after her first relationship because violent disagreements about Catherine Eddowes drinking and a common lodging house in Spitalfields, which was at the centre of London's most notorious criminal rookery, and she was most often earned money from a variety of sources, including casual prostitution to pay her daily rent. Now, on the 29th of September 1888, Eddowes had been detained by the police for being drunk and disorderly, and she had not been able to stand up by herself, and she was not released from police custody in Bishopsgate Police Station until 1 a.m. on the 30th of September 1888. Eddowes was murdered in the early hours of Sunday, the 30th of September, within the City of London, within an hour of Elizabeth Stride being murdered, and the location of Eddowes' murder was within walking distance of the scene of Elizabeth Stride's murder. Now, Catherine Eddowes was last seen alive on the 30th of September 1888 at 1:35 a.m. in a small walkway known as Church Passage by 3 witnesses, one of whom, Joseph Lorend, who had later testified that he had seen Eddowes talking to a man who was of medium build with a fair moustache at the entrance to Church Passage. Lorend believed that this man was approximately 30, 5'7" tall, which is approximately 1.7 meters, and he was wearing a loose-fitting pepper and salt coloured jacket, a grey peaked cloth cap, and a reddish neckerchief, and he claimed that he walked past them and did not look back. Eddowes' mutilated and disemboweled body was found lying on her back, with her head resting on a coal hole and turned towards the left shoulder in the southwest corner of Meter Square by the square's beat policeman, a PC Edward Watkins, at 1:44 a.m., who then asked for assistance from the night watchman of the Clearly and Tonge warehouse, which bordered Meter Square, who, along with 3 other independent people, reported that he hadn't noticed anything unusual that evening. At approximately 2:55 a.m. on the 30th of September, a blood-stained fragment of Eddowes' apron was discovered at the bottom of a common stairway at a tenement in Galston Street, Whitechapel, by PC Alfred Long. On the and scrawled upon the wall above where the section of apron was found was a crude chalk graffiti, which said the letters measuring approximately 2¾ of an inch, which is allegedly read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," which is what's on that screen there. So this was found reportedly very on the wall, very close to her, where her body was discovered. The graffiti has been the subject of great debate, which was whether the message of the graffiti was that the Jews in general were responsible for the series of murders, or whether it was written by the murderer, or whether the graffiti was already present in the location where the section of apron was found. It should be noted also that at this time, anti-Semitic graffiti was commonplace in around Whitechapel. And when Eddowes' body was discovered just 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of the body of Elizabeth Stride, she was found to have had her throat severed from ear to ear, and her abdomen had been ripped open, and her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder, with a section of intestine being completely detached and placed between her body and left arm. The left kidney and the major part of Eddowes' uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, with her nose severed, her cheeks slashed, and cuts measuring 3/4 of an inch and a half, respectively, vertically incised through each of her eyelids. A triangular incision, the apex of which pointed towards Eddowes' eye, had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of the auricle and lobe of her right ear had been recovered from her clothing. The police surgeon who conducted the post-mortem upon Eddowes' body stated his opinion that these mutilations could have taken at least 5 minutes to complete. A letter dated the 15th of October 1888 and addressed from hell was received by the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, George Lusk, and accompanying this letter was a part of a left human kidney. The writer of the letter claimed that the section of kidney that had been sent with this letter was from Miss Eddowes, and that the other half had been fried and eaten by him. However, most experts believe that these claims were complete fabrication and the kidney did not come from Miss Eddowes' body. So, we've got another message here from Pepsi Pack. And Pepsi Pack is saying, I keep thinking of Edu every time you mention this woman's name. Oh dear, that's not good. Ange B says, Pepsi Pack, I thought that, and he sure cooks. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. I think that's a good job that we've left her behind then for the time being. Right, so guys, please make sure you subscribe to Diesel. Diesel, I don't know what I could say about Diesel. His shows are just incredible. He comes on and he talks and he talks and he talks. It's not scripted. He just says what's on his mind and he just speaks and speaks and speaks. And it's incredible because he has no script and he just comes on and he just says whatever he's thinking. And it's amazing to watch. And you can be watching Diesel and an hour could have gone and you would think it was about 5 minutes. Right, because he holds your attention and he always talks about interesting things and talks 100% facts. And yeah, he's just a really, really top guy. So please do yourself a favor and make sure you subscribe to Diesel, and also make sure that you put a like on this video for him. Listen, Diesel does stuff about Arsenal, as the name of his channel suggests, Arsenal Football Club. He also talks about life and TV, and because he's very passionate about his TV. And also he has me come on to talk about stuff to do with conspiracy theories or unexplained phenomena, stuff like that, which is great passion of mine as well. So yeah, make sure that you come on and subscribe to Diesel if you haven't done it already. Also, please come and subscribe to my channel, Warren's Team Talk. And I will very shortly be probably, what's today? I think it's Thursday, isn't it? Or is it Wednesday today? Yeah, it's Wednesday today. So probably on Friday night, I'm going to upload my second part of my interview with Darren Sullivan, a massive Arsenal fan. We did a part 2 of our chat the other night, and that was great. So make sure you look out for that. And then on Saturday, I'll be doing my usual Saturday antics, the match day live shows. So you're more than welcome to come along and get involved with that. It's just a bit light-hearted banter around football matches that are kicking off up and down the country. At 3 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon. So that's always good fun. So let's move on. Right, so perhaps James Steele says, thanks, Warren. You're very welcome, my friend. It's an absolute pleasure. Taib saying as well, according to Hallie Rubenhold, a historian, she claims that most of the Jack the Ripper victims were homeless women and not prostitutes. Well, most of them were involved. I can guarantee you, mate, most of them were involved in prostitution. That's what multiple sources I went through for this have told me. But I respect the woman's opinion, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Yeah, they were all homeless or had severe housing issues, but not prostitutes. No, I'm sorry, I'm not. No, I don't believe that, because that's the first person I've ever heard say that. And Pepsi Pack says Diesel also talks about his fondness for Mikel Arteta. Yeah, yeah, he does like talking about Arsenal and what's going on at the moment. Taib says, Warren, are you the shining light of YouTube? Always great to hear your voice. Thank you very much, Taib. I'm not sure that I am. I think there's a few others that are more deserving of that title than me, but thank you very much for your kind comment. Static saying, hey, Warren. Yeah, nice to see you, Static. I hope you're well, my friend. Lovely to see you in the chat. Ange B says, very good, Warren. I'm part of Mr. Arsenal podcast, all Arsenal shows. So please join us tomorrow at 8 p.m. I will try. I will definitely try, Ange. Thank you very much. Static says 14 likes. And like and subscribe. Yeah, please, people, let's get those likes up. And let's get this thing rocking for Diesel. Yeah, he's top geezer and really, really good mate. And I love the fella a bit. So please make sure that you do the honourable thing and get those likes up for him. Please do that. Thank you very much. Right, so we're now going to talk about Mary Jane Kelly. She was born in around 1863 and died on the 9th of November 1888. And it is widely believed by scholars that Mary Jane Kelly was the fifth of the canonical five and the final victim of Jack the Ripper. Kelly's early life is shrouded in mystery, as there's no documentary evidence about her either way, about her early life. The last partner that Miss Kelly had before she was murdered was Joseph Burnett. Excuse me, I'm very sorry, guys. Was Joseph Burnett. Claims that she told him that she had been born in Limerick in Ireland sometime in 1863, and she also claimed that her family moved to Wales when she was a child, and she also claims that her parents had disowned her, although she had a good relationship with her sister. She also told Burnett that her family was moderately wealthy, and she had 7 brothers and at least 1 sister. From reports at the time, she was described as being about 5'7" tall and had an attractive appearance. It was believed that she was illiterate because at the inquest to her death, Barnett informed the coroners that she frequently asked him to read newspaper articles about the Whitechapel murders. In 1869, when she was aged approximately 16, it was alleged that she married a coal miner named Davies, who died 2 or 3 years later in a mining explosion. Now, after the loss of her husband and without any means of financial support, Kelly relocated to Cardiff, where she lived with a cousin. It is believed at this point she started her career as a prostitute after allegedly being introduced to the profession by a cousin, but there are no police records indicating that she was arrested for prostitution. Now, after moving to London from Cardiff, after losing her husband, who she had married aged just 16 in 1869, she then spent a brief time in France, and when she returned, she was using the name of Marie Jeannette. And then between 9th of April 1887 and circa March 1888, her partner Joseph Burnett and her had resided in various lodgings in East London, and there were a number of issues due to non-payment of rent, drunk and disorderly conduct. Kelly and Burnett then took up residence in a single room which was about 12 foot square, and its door opened into a passageway which connected Miller's Court with Dorset Street. And in July 1888, Barnett lost his job as a fish porter, and Kelly had resorted to prostitution. And then on the 30th of October, Barnett moved out after the couple had fought over Kelly, allowing other prostitutes to sleep in their small room. After the split, Barnett would visit Kelly almost on a daily basis until her death to give her money. On the 9th of November at 2 a.m., unemployed labourer George Hutchinson claims that he had met Kelly on Flower and Dean Street, and he saw her later approached by a man of Jewish appearance who was aged about 34 or 35. Hutchinson also claims they were suspicious of this man because despite Kelly knowing the chap, he seemed to have high-class appearance, which Hutchinson's found to be suspicious because of the area he was in. And additionally, the guy made strenuous efforts to try and hide his features by hiding his head with his hat over his eyes as Kelly and the man passed him. On the morning of the 9th of November 1888, Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant to collect the rent, and it is believed that Kelly was 6 weeks behind on the payments. Now, by 10:45 a.m., McCarthy's assistant had not been able to get a response from Kelly, and so after trying unsuccessfully to find out if there was anyone in the room by looking through the keyhole and trying to open the door, he decided to push aside the clothing used to plug the broken window pane and the muslin curtains which covered the windows, and this allowed him to see Kelly's extensively mutilated corpse lying on the bed. She is believed to have died between 3 and 9 hours before the discovery of her body, and at the time of Kelly's death, she was approximately 25 years old and was working as a prostitute and living in relative poverty. McCarthy's then instructed his assistant to inform Commercial Street Police Station of his discovery, and after speaking to Inspector Walter Beck, they returned to the murder scene with officers from Scotland Yard and bloodhounds who examined Kelly's dead body and murder scene. Joseph Burnett attended Shoreditch Mortuary, and he was only able to formally identify Kelly, but he was only able to do so by her ears and her eyes. John McCarthy also confirmed that the body was Kelly. The news of the discovery of another Ripper victim spread rapidly through the East End, and a crowd of over 1,000 people gathered at each end of Dorset Street, many of whom were voicing their frustrations at the news of yet another victim being discovered. It was believed that the mutilation of Kelly's corpse was far worse than any of the other Whitechapel murder victims, and it is highly likely this was because the murder took place in a private room rather than a public place, and it likely took the murderer circa 2 hours to complete the mutilation. Her body was viewed by John McCarthy, and he was able to confirm the body was Kelly's. So there's a few more chats in here, so let's see what they are. And Taib's asking, Warren, why did the skunk sit on a stump? Laugh out loud. That's your favourite one, isn't it? Taib, fair play to you, mate. I ain't got a clue to answer your question. Ange B says, I'm fully subscribed. Fair play to you, Ange. Thank you very much. Subscribe should read. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I very much appreciate that. Static says Warren always reads comments while balancing things out by providing a good show. Well, I try, mate. It's not always easy, but I do try. So let's move on. So, other victims of Jack the Ripper, there are other alleged victims. So, let's quickly rattle through those, as well as the murders that took place in the Whitechapel area at the same time. Some other attacks have been linked to Jack the Ripper. For example, some of these attacks, including the following: Fairy Fay, which was the name given to an unidentified woman who had a stake thrust to her abdomen and was found in a doorway close to Commercial Road on the 26th of December 1887, and many claim that this woman never even existed. Annie Millward, who was a 38-year-old widow who was admitted to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary on the 25th of February 1888, having suffered numerous stab wounds to her legs and lower torso. She was discharged and then died of natural causes on the 31st of March. Ada Wilson, who allegedly survived after being stabbed in the neck on her doorstep in Bow on the 28th of March 1888. Annie Farmer, who had lived at the same lodging house as Martha Tabram, and she was allegedly reported an attack, and she allegedly reported an attack on the 21st of November, in which she claims that she had received a superficial cut to her throat. Many people at the time noted that that the wound was light and felt it was likely self-inflicted. On the 2nd of April 1888, a woman's headless torso was found in the basement of the new Metropolitan Police headquarters being built in Whitehall. There were other body parts which it was believed belonged to the headless torso were discovered, and this case became known as the Whitechapel Mystery. Elizabeth Jackson was a 24-year-old prostitute from Chelsea whose various body parts were collected from the River Thames over a 3-week period between the 31st of May and 25th of June 1889. The Pinchin Street torso. Now, this was a decomposing headless and legless torso of an unidentified woman aged between 30 and 40, which was discovered beneath a railway arch in Pinchin Street, in Whitechapel on the 10th of September 1889. Now, shortly before her death, it seems that the victim had been badly beaten, as the victim's body seemed to have extensive bruising all over it. The victim's abdomen was also extensively mutilated, although her genitals had not been wounded. However, dismembered parts of her body were allegedly found near a railway arch, hidden under an old item of women's clothing. Frances Coles was found with her throat cut under a railway arch in Whitechapel at 2:15 a.m. on the 13th of February 1891. Her throat had been deeply cut, but her body was not mutilated, leading some to believe that Thompson had disturbed her assailant. And Coles was still alive, although she died before medical help could arrive. The Whitechapel Mystery in the Pinchin Street case may have been part of a series of murders known as the Thames Mysteries, committed by a single serial killer dubbed the Torso Killer. It is debatable whether Jack the Ripper, to be honest, and the Torso Killer were the same person or separate serial killers active in the same area. And it is also believed that the way the Torso Killer and Jack the Ripper operated differed from each other, and police at the time therefore discounted any connection between the two. Right, okay, so let's move on. So let's look at the investigation. It seems that unfortunately most of the files belonging to the City of London Police relating to their investigation into the Whitechapel murders were destroyed in the Blitz in World War II, and what files did survive give an interesting insight into how the investigation was conducted at the time. The Metropolitan Police files at the time show that their investigation into the serial killings encompassed 11 separate murders between 1888 and 1891, known in the police docket as the Whitechapel murders, and five of these, the murders of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are collectively known as the Canonical Five, and they are also generally agreed to be the work of a single killer known as Jack the Ripper. So it seems that a large number of police officers conducted house-to-house inquiries in the Whitechapel area, as well as the collection and examination of forensic material, and a number of suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from their inquiries. It seems that the police interviewed more than 2,000 people, with more than 300 being investigated and 80 were detained. And after Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered, the police commissioner of the city police, Sir James Fraser, offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of the Ripper. So, initially, the investigations were conducted by Whitechapel CID and headed by Detective Inspector Edmund Reed. However, after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, Detective Inspectors Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews were sent from the central office at Scotland Yard to assist with the investigation. And the City of London Police became involved under Detective Inspector James McWilliams when Catherine Eddowes was murdered within the geographical area known as the City of London. Now, the City of London is a part of London where the traditional financial institutions such as the Bank of England and the London Stock Exchange sit, as well as the central business district, and it formed the vast majority of London from its settlement by the Romans in the 1st century AD right up to the Middle Ages. But as we all know, London has now grown far beyond the original boundaries of the City of London. And just an interesting fact, those who aren't from London, if you ever do go to London, if you go to Tower Hill tube station, you come out the tube station, you should be able to see like remaining parts of the old city wall that was built by the Romans. So, which I found quite interesting. It's ruined and in it's nowhere near the grandeur that it was when it was first built, but it is there. So, however, the overall direction of the inquiries into the murders was problematic and hindered because of the fact that the newly appointed head of the CID, Robert Anderson, was on leave in Switzerland between the 7th of September and the 6th of October, which was the time during which Catherine Eddowes, Elizabeth Stride, and Annie Chapman were murdered. And so, as a consequence, this led to Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren appointing Chief Inspector Donald Swanson to coordinate the inquiry from Scotland Yard. Now, in September 1888, a group of volunteer citizens in London's East End formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. They patrolled the streets looking for suspicious characters, but partly because of dissatisfaction with the failure of police to apprehend the perpetrator, and also because some members were concerned that the murders were affecting businesses in the area. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee petitioned the government to raise a reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer, and they offered their own reward of £50, which would be equivalent to £5,900 and £86,000 in 2021. So they wanted this so that they could get information leading to the capture of the individual known as Jack the Ripper, and they also hired private detectives to question witnesses independently. Now, allegedly, because of the nature of the mutilations of the victims, the alibis of 76 local butchers and slaughterers and all their employees resulted in them being eliminated from the inquiry. So let's just quickly have a look, see what we got in here. Static saying 15 likes, like and subscribe. Yeah, come on, guys, please hit that like button, get it up. Please do that for Diesel. It's really important because, yeah, the stream is free. You don't have to pay for it, but by hitting the like button, it makes the YouTube computer decide to throw the videos out to a wider range of people. So the more likes it gets, the better it is. So yeah, please make sure you do that. Steve RFC says big up. Nice to see you, Steve. I hope you're well, my friend. Lovely to see you on the stream. Thanks for coming in. Steve says, are you watching Man City Sevilla? It's 1-0 to Seville. A good start for Arsenal and Man United. Got away with 1 versus Wolves because Wolves should have won 5-1 at least. Yeah, I saw some of the highlights from that Wolves Man United game. It looks like Wolves actually absolutely took them to the cleaners. So, yeah. Okay, so at the end, moving on, at the end of October 1888, police surgeon Thomas Bond was asked to give his opinion on the extent of the murderer's surgical skill and knowledge. The report provided by Thomas Bond on the character of the Whitechapel murderer is believed to be the earliest surviving offender profile. In his assessment, which was based on his own examination of the most extensively mutilated victim and the post-mortem notes from the 4 other murders known as the canonical 5 murders, Thomas Bond was of the opinion that the person who had committed these murders must have been someone who let me start that again. Thomas Bond was of the opinion that the person who committed these murders must have been someone with solitary habits who had periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania, with the character of the mutilations possibly indicating satyriasis, which is excessive or abnormal sexual craving in the male. But Thomas Bond disagreed strongly with the idea that the murderer possessed any kind of scientific or anatomical knowledge, or even the technical knowledge of a butcher or a horse slaughterer. Bond also stated that the homicidal impulse may have developed from a revengeful or brooding condition of the mind, or that religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think either hypothesis is likely, he said. There is no evidence the perpetrator engaged in sexual activity with any of the victims, yet psychologists suppose that the penetration of the victims with a knife and leaving them on display in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed indicates that the perpetrator derived sexual pleasure from the attacks. This view is challenged by others who dismiss such hypotheses hypotheses as insupportable supposition. Right, so moving on. So, as well as the contradictions and unreliability of contemporaneous accounts, many attempts to identify the murderer in the modern day are hampered by the lack of any surviving forensic evidence. It should also be noted that DNA analysis of existing letters and or documents from the time is also inconclusive because of the fact they have typically been handled so many times and it is now too contaminated to provide meaningful results. However, there have been incompatible claims that DNA evidence points to two different subjects: Aaron Kosminski, a Whitechapel barber, and artist Walter Sickert. In addition, the scientific methodology which was used to advance both of these claims has also been criticised. So let's move on and talk about the suspects. The fact that the murders took place on weekends or public holidays and all happened within a short distance of each other meant that belief quickly arose that the murderer was in regular employment and lived locally. There was also a belief that the murderer was an educated upper class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat who ventured into Whitechapel from a more affluent area. Some of the suspects that have been proposed are Prince Albert Victor, artist Walter Sickert, author Lewis Carroll, and H. Holmes. Since the murders started in 1888, no one has been successful in identifying the culprit, although many people have been named as suspects. The problem that the police faced was that there was very little in the way of crime scene investigation back then, unless the attacker left a personal item at the scene which could be traced back to them, or if someone was able to give a detailed description of them, the police had very little chance of finding the right person. The Ripper seemed to know this too. He planned his attacks to take place at night and far away from any prying eyes. This is probably one of the reasons why he chose to attack prostitutes. Now, back in the late Victorian era, prostitution was illegal and people selling themselves had to conduct themselves discreetly. Any customer would be led to a quiet area of the town where the woman knew they would not be interrupted by the police, but these quiet places were also a perfect setting for the murders. There are also at least 100 named suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, but despite being probably the most famous murder case in history, Jack the Ripper's identity remains unknown. Now, due to the speed and manner of the mutilations performed on some of the bodies, which included disembowelment and removal of organs, this led to speculation that the murderer had the skills of a physician or a butcher. However, others disagreed strongly and thought the wounds were too crude to be professional. The alibis of local butchers and slaughterers were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. It's been reported that over 2,000 people were interviewed, upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. Now, during the course of the investigation of the murders, police regarded several men as strong suspects, although none were ever formally charged. So, the suspects analysed. So, let's have a look at this. The first one we're going to look at is a chap by the name of Montague John Druitt. And Steve RFC he's put in comments saying, I finished watching Northside Watch Along. It was good. He talks facts. His reaction to AFTV, good to watch. Yes, it is. It's very good. He knows what he's talking about, so that's good. Steve RFC says Man City won, Sevilla won. Yeah, excellent. Thanks for keeping us updated, man. Montague John Druitt. Now, he was a barrister who worked to supplement his income as an assistant schoolmaster in Blackheath, London, until his dismissal shortly before his suicide by drowning in 1888. There were and continues to be lots of rumours and suspicion as to what caused John Druitt to commit suicide. Some have suggested it was because he was a known homosexual and at this time could have driven him to commit suicide, and this at this time could have driven him to commit suicide, and or it was known that both his mother and his grandmother suffered mental health problems, and it is felt that it was possible that he was dismissed because of an underlying hereditary psychiatric illness. It was alleged that he was sexually insane, and members of his family suspected that he was the Ripper. His death shortly after the last canonical murder, which took place on the 9th of November 1888, led by Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaghten, and led Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaghten to name him as a suspect in a memorandum that he sent on the 23rd of February 1894. However, Macnaghten incorrectly described the 31-year-old barrister as a 41-year-old doctor. On the 1st September, the day after the first canonical murder, Druitt was in Dorset playing cricket, and most experts now believe that the killer was local to Whitechapel, whereas Druitt lived miles away on the other side of the Thames in Kent. Inspector Frederick Aberline appeared to dismiss Druitt as a serious suspect on the basis that the only evidence against him was the coincidental timing of his suicide shortly after the last canonical murder. So the next one up is Jacob or Joseph Essenschmidt. He was a Swiss butcher living in Milford Road. He suffered from severe depression and psychiatric disorders and had a history of violent attacks on women in the Whitechapel area, which had seen him hospitalised for psychiatric treatment in the past. On the 11th of September 1888, two doctors reported to the police they suspected him of being a Ripper due to his strange habits. His wife told police that he was violent and erratic, that he always carried large knives even when they were not required for his trade, that he had threatened to kill her on at least one occasion, that he had left his home for no reason 2 months ago and only returned sporadically. He was arrested on the 13th of September, and a psychiatric evaluation found he was violently insane and potentially dangerous, with a judge ordering him imprisoned in a mental hospital. However, the double event murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes occurred on the 30th of September, while Essenschmidt was in hospital, exonerating him of the murders. This assumes, of course, that all the murders were committed by the same person. So there you have it. George Chapman. Now, George Chapman, he was born in Congress, Poland, on the 14th of December, 1865. but he emigrated to the United Kingdom sometime between 1887 and 1888, shortly before the start of the Whitechapel murders. Between 1893 and 1894, he assumed the name of Chapman. He successfully poisoned 3 of his wives and became known as the Borough Poisoner. He was hanged for his crimes in 1903. At the time of the Ripper murders, he lived in Whitechapel, London, where he had been working as a barber until his name, Ludwig Cholowski. According to H.L. Adam, who wrote a book on the poisonings in 1930, Chapman was Inspector Frederick Aberline's favoured suspect, and the Pall Mall Gazette reported that Aberline suspected Chapman after his conviction. However, others disagree that Chapman is a likely culprit, as he murdered his 3 wives with poison, and it is uncommon, though not unheard of, for a serial killer to make such a drastic change in modus operandi. So, Aaron Kosminski, he was a Polish Jew who was admitted to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in 1891. Kosminski, without a forename, was named as a suspect by Sir Melville Macnaghten in his 1894 memorandum and by his former Chief Inspector Donald Swanson in handwritten comments in the margin of his copy of Assistant Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson's memoirs. Anderson wrote that the only person who had ever had a good view of the murderer unhesitantly identified the suspect the instant he was confronted with him. The suspect also apparently fitted their profile, a sexual maniac of virulent type. He was living in the immediate vicinity of the scenes of the murders, and that if he was not living immediately alone, his people knew of his guilt and refused to give him up to justice. Furthermore, a house-to-house search was conducted for the case of every man in the district whose circumstances were such that he could come and go and get rid of bloodstains in secret. Sir Robert Anderson goes on to state the conclusion the police came to following this investigation was that Jack the Ripper and his people were certainly low-class Polish Jews, but since the person who identified him was also a Polish Jew, and people of that class in the East End would not give up one of their number to Gentile justice, the suspect was never prosecuted. Anderson was finally convinced that the suspect's guilt and was convinced of the suspect's guilt and wrote about it in his memoirs. However, some other authors have disputed his claims, whilst others who are supportive of Anderson's claims have used his findings in their theories. However, in contrast to Anderson's findings, Macnaghten, in his memorandum, stated that no one was ever identified as the Ripper, which directly contradicts Anderson's recollection. In 1987, author Martin Fido searched asylum records for any inmates called Kosminski and found only one, Aaron Kosminski. Kosminski lived in Whitechapel. However, he was largely harmless in the asylum. According to the records that he found, his insanity took the form of auditory hallucinations, a paranoid fear of being fed by other people, a refusal to wash or bathe, and self-abuse. Also, to counter the belief put forward by Anderson that Kosminski was the Ripper, the former FBI profiler John Douglas, in his book, The Cases That Haunt Us, states that a paranoid individual such as Kosminski would likely have openly boasted of the murders while incarcerated had he been the killer, but there was no record that he ever did so. In 2014, DNA analysis tenuously linked Kosminski with a shawl said to have belonged to victim Catherine Eddowes, but experts, including Professor Sir Alec Jeffreys, the inventor of genetic fingerprinting, also dismissed the claims as unreliable. This was because the genetic match determined from material descendants of Eddowes and Kosminski was based on mitochondrial DNA, strands of mitochondrial DNA can be shared by thousands of people and therefore can be reliably used in crime analysis to exclude a suspect but not implicate them. As well as this, many consider it conjecture without substantial evidence that the shawl purportedly removed from the crime scene by police constable Amos Simpson even belonged to Eddowes, who herself was impoverished and arguably could not have afforded to purchase it herself. In March 2019, the Journal of Forensic Sciences published a study that claimed that DNA from Kosminski and Catherine Eddowes was found on the shore, though other scientists have cast doubt on that study. A BBC documentary, Jack the Ripper, The Case Reopened, broadcast the same year and presented by Emilia Fox, concluded that Kosminski was the most likely suspect. Right, let's move on. Michael Ostrog. He was a Russian-born professional conman and thief, and he was known to use numerous aliases and assumed titles. Among his many dubious claims was that he had once been a surgeon in the Russian Navy. He was mentioned as a suspect by Magnatin, who joined the case in 1889, the year after the canonical 5 victims were killed. However, researchers have failed to find any evidence that he had committed any crimes any more serious than fraud and theft. Author Philip Sugden discovered prison records showing that Ostrog was jailed for petty offences in France in September 1888 during the majority of the suspected Ripper murder cases, and so this would rule him out of being a suspect. Ostrog was last mentioned alive in 1984. The date of his death is unknown. Excuse me. So John Pfizer, or Pizer, he was a Polish Jew who worked as a bootmaker in Whitechapel. In the early days of the Whitechapel murders, many locals suspected that Leather Apron was the killer, which was picked up by the press, and Pizer was known as Leather Apron. It should be noted as well, there was widespread fear in the Whitechapel area of a character known as Leather Apron, because in late 1888, one of the names that the killer had was Leather Apron. There was also a leather apron found close to the body of Annie Chapman. However, some have claimed that this apron in fact belonged to Annie Chapman. In the early days of the police investigations, they attempted to speak to local prostitutes about the murders and the character known as Leather Apron, but unfortunately they could tell the police very little about him, other than he habitually wore a leather apron, hence his nickname, and that he sometimes wore a deerstalker hat, and that he was running an extortion racket demanding money off the prostitutes and beating those up who refused. Sergeant William Thick, an officer who was greatly involved in the investigation into the Jack the Ripper murders, was adamant that whenever people of the area spoke about Leather Apron, they were referring to a man named John or Jack Pizer. So the police set about trying to find him to either prove his guilt or else eliminate him as a suspect. Now, unfortunately, within days, their investigation suffered an almighty setback when, either through unguarded comments of police officers or more probably from the local tittle-tattle that appears to have been doing the rounds of the lodging houses and hostelries of the district, the newspapers found out about their main suspect. On the 5th of September, the Star newspaper ran the first of several articles that alarmed local residents and frustrated the police, which had hoped to keep their suspicions a closely guarded secret. In two articles, the Star newspaper provided its readers with a description of Leather Apron, his alleged activities, his profession, and other characteristics which appeared to be his hallmarks, such as the fact that he moves around silently. Though the Star's campaign to alert the populace to the noiseless menace in their midst, John Pizer learnt of the police's suspicions through it, and the prospect of falling victim to a baying mob terrified him. And because he now knew that he was public enemy number one, he promptly went into hiding amongst his relatives, and the police operation was hugely frustrated. Pizer would remain in hiding until the 10th of September, on which day Sergeant William Thick went around to number 22 Marlborough Street and arrested him. But under immense interrogation, Pizer provided cast iron alibis for the nights of two of the most recent murders and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. It has been claimed that Pizer had a conviction for a stabbing offence, and Police Sergeant William Thick believed that he had committed a string of minor assaults on prostitutes. After the murders of Mary Ann Nichols and Annie Chapman in late August and early September 1888, respectively, Thick arrested Pizer on the 10th of September, even though the investigating inspector reported there is no evidence whatsoever against him. He was cleared of suspicion when it turned out that he had alibis for two of the murders. He was staying with relatives at the time of one of the murders, and he was talking with a police officer while watching a spectacular fire on the London docks at the time of another. Pizer and Thick had known each other for years, and Pizer implied that his arrest was based on animosity rather than evidence. Pizer then successfully obtained monetary compensation from at least one newspaper that had him as the murderer. So Static is in the chat and he's saying, Ron, I've got to go, but I'll definitely watch this on playback. Take care. Keep up the great work for your channel and for Diesels too. You're a real one. Thank you very much, Static. Good man. Thanks for coming in and tuning in. And please, when you come back, put in a comment saying who you think was the murderer. Thanks ever so much and have a great evening. Static says, Ron, great job. Thank you very much, my man. And keep hitting the likes and subscribe, everyone. Yeah, please keep doing that. And that brings me on to this. So please make sure you go and subscribe to Diesel. Put a like on the video for him. Please do that. Diesel has got a great channel where he talks about issues to do with Arsenal Football Club. He talks about television. He talks about life in general as well. And he also has me coming onto his channel as well to talk about the paranormal and unexplained mysteries and conspiracy theories. So make sure you subscribe to Diesel's channel, because if you're not subscribed, you're really missing out. His shows are legendary, in my opinion, and I think he's a great guy. So yeah, make sure you do that, and you won't be disappointed. I'm sure of that. That's for sure. Please come over and subscribe to my channel. My channel's Warren's Team Talk, and on that channel, I do a Saturday show every Saturday where I cover all the action and most of the leagues in the United Kingdom, and we have a good bit of banter and a bit of a laugh at the same time. It's great fun. So anyone who's interested, please make sure you pop in and say hello. Steve RFC said, I'm glad I subscribed to Diesel, and you and your videos with Diesel are good to watch. Thank you very much, Steve. It's great to hear. Thank you very much. Ange B says, thank you, Warren, and great diversion of football, and do love a good mystery. Thank you, Ange. That's lovely to hear. And yeah, I'll definitely try and check out this stream of yours that you're talking about. So let's move on and move on now to James Thomas Sadler. He was a friend of Francis Coles and the last victim of the Whitechapel, added to the Whitechapel murderers police file. Coles was murdered on the 13th of February 1891. Her body was discovered beneath a railway arch in Swallow Gardens in Whitechapel. She allegedly sustained two deep slash wounds to her neck. She was still alive when she was found, but died before medical help could arrive. Sadler was arrested, but little evidence existed against him. Sadler was named in Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum in connection with Cole's murder, and is described later as being a man of ungovernable temper and entirely addicted to drink and the company of the lowest prostitutes. On the evening of Francis Cole's killing, on the 12th of February, the couple spent their time drinking from tavern to tavern, and when they separated, she bought a new hat and he was the victim of a robbery. Sadler insisted that he left Coles in the guest house around 2 a.m. and he never saw her again. The acting judge ordered the suspect to be held in Holloway Prison. Soon, very damaging circulations appeared against him, where his responsibility for the girl's death was taken for granted, that undoubtedly he was Jack the Ripper. The smear campaign became so overblown that the British Interior Minister expressed his displeasure before the Parliament about the newspapers, which sought to satisfy the public's thirst for sensationalism. The prisoner, in turn, proclaimed his innocence constantly, and one of the newspapers picked up on his complaints. What a blessing my case will be for the police, he exclaimed in an ironic argument. They would solve all the unsolved crimes if they could only send me, no matter how innocent I am, to the gallows. The police briefly considered him to be a Ripper suspect, but he was at sea at the time of the first 4 canonical murders and was released without charge. Francis Tumblety. Now, Francis Tumblety was a young American. He came over to England in 1888. He earned a small fortune posing as an Indian herb doctor throughout the United States and Canada, and was commonly perceived as a misogynist and a quack. He was connected to the death of one of his patients but escaped prosecution. In 1865, he was arrested for allegedly being involved in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but no connection was ever found, and he was released without being charged. Many people believe Tumbleby to be the most likely of all the suspects to be the Ripper. Francis Tumblety arrived in England 2 months before the first canonical murder happened. When compared to the profile, we see that he matches it almost perfectly. Tumblety was staying near Whitechapel, so had knowledge. He had local knowledge. He trained as a medical assistant, so had the necessary skills to find organs and remove them quickly. He left his wife when he found out that she was a prostitute and was believed to harbour a hatred for women. This gave him a motive for the attacks. The Metropolitan Police arrested Tumblety on the 7th of November 1888 on charges of gross indecency, apparently for having been caught engaging in a homosexual encounter, which was illegal at the time. Whilst awaiting trial on this charge on bail of £300, equivalent to around £36,000 today, and knowing that Scotland Yard was increasingly interested in him with regard to the recent murder spree in Whitechapel, he fled England for France on the 20th of November under the false name of Frank Townsend, and then on the 24th of November 1888, he returned to the United States. Already notorious in the United States for his self-promotion and previous brushes with the law, Tumblety's arrest in London was reported in the New York Times as being connected to the Ripper murders. Around this time, it was considered by some of his friends that he showed off a collection of mattresses, wombs from every class of woman, which is very interesting when you consider that at the inquest into Annie Chapman's murder, the divisional police surgeon, Dr. George Baxter Phillips, expressed his opinion that Annie Chapman had been murdered in order that her killer could obtain her womb. Phillips also opined that the skill and speed that he displayed in removing the organ suggested that the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. American reports that Scotland Yard tried to extradite him were not confirmed by the British press or the London police, and the New York City police said there is no proof of his involvement in the Whitechapel murders, and the crime for which he is under bond in London is not extraditable. In 1913, Tumblety was named as a Ripper suspect by Chief Inspector John Littlechild of the Metropolitan Police Service. In a letter to journalist and author George R. Sims, and it is believed that his suspicion was because of Tumblety's extreme misogyny and his previous criminal record. Other Ripperologists have dismissed Tumblety as a plausible Ripper suspect because of the fact that his appearance and his age did not match the description of any of the men that were seen with the murder victims, and that his relatively tall height of at least 5'10" tall, 1.78 meters, an enormous moustache would have made him particularly conspicuous. However, a contemporary interview described Tumblety as having a much smaller moustache at the time of the Whitechapel murders than is seen in the well-known photograph of him. Right, so on we go. Walter Richard Sickart. He was a German-born artist of British and Danish ancestry. He was first mentioned as a possible Ripper suspect in Donald McCormick's 1959 book, The Identity of Jack the Ripper. He had a fascination with the Ripper murders, going so far as to say in a room that he was rumoured to have once had Jack the Ripper himself as a lodger, and depicted similar scenes in many of his paintings. Sicart subsequently appeared as a character in the Royal Masonic conspiracy theory concocted by Joseph Gorman, who claimed to be Sicart's illegitimate son, and also later by author Jean Overton Fuller and by crime novelist Patricia Cornwell in her books Portrait of a Killer, 2002, and Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sicart, 2017. However, Sicart is not considered a serious suspect by most who study the case, and strong evidence shows that he was in France at the time of most of the Ripper murders. Cornwell's allegation that Sicart was the Ripper was based on a DNA analysis of letters that had been sent to Scotland Yard, but experts believe that these letters were fake, and another genetic analysis of the letters claimed the murderer could have been a woman. So on we go, and now we get to Lewis Carroll, which was the pen name of Charles Ludwig Dodgson. He was the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. He was named as a suspect based upon anagrams which Richard Wallace devised for his book, Jack the Ripper, Light-Hearted Friend. Richard Wallace argues that Carroll had a psychotic breakdown after being assaulted by a man when he was 12. In addition, according to Wallace, Carroll wrote a diary every day in purple ink, but on the days of the Whitechapel killings, he switched to black. However, this claim is not taken seriously by experts, especially when an excerpt of Wallace's book appeared in Harper's, A Letter to the Editor, written by George Jacobson, and Francis Heaney took the first paragraph of Wallace's excerpt and produced an anagram that had Wallace confessing to the murder of Nicole Brown and the framing of O.J. Simpson, thus demonstrating how incriminating anagrams could be produced from any reasonably length passage. Right. So on we go to next one, which is Charles Allen. Charles Allen Lechmere. He was also known as Charles Cross, and he was a meat cart driver for the Pickford's company, and is conventionally regarded as an innocent witness who discovered the body of the first canonical Ripper victim, Mary Ann Nichols. It is claimed that Lechmere found the body of the victim, Mary Ann Nichols. It's claimed that Lechmere found the body of Mary Ann Nichols. He called over Robert Poole to look at her, and no blood was visible. However, by the time a constable found her shortly afterward, a pool had formed around her neck, suggesting the cut to her throat was extremely fresh when Lechmere and Poole were present, although modern forensics have shown that blood can ooze from a wound for up to 2 hours. He also refused Poole's suggestion to prop her up, which would have instantly made it clear that her throat had been cut. In addition, neither man reported seeing nor hearing anyone else in Bucks Row, which had no side exits. Her injuries were also hidden under her clothing, whereas the Ripper typically left the wounds displayed. It was theorized that Lechmere had killed Nichols and begun the process of mutilating her body when he heard Poole's footsteps, and then he rushed to betray himself as the discoverer of the body. Lechmere did not come forward until Paul mentioned him to the press, and he gave evidence under the name Charles Cross at the inquest. Cross was the surname of a stepfather. Lechmere's home address, visits to family, and route to work link him to the times and places of the murders. He passed 3 streets from where Martha Tabram, Polly Nichols, and Annie Chapman were murdered. Roughly at the same time, the murders are estimated to have occurred. The double event murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes occurred on a Saturday, his only night off from work. Stride was killed near Lechmere's mother's house in an area he grew up in, and the direct route from Stride's murder scene to the local location of Eddowes' murder followed a path to Lechmere's route to work that he had used for 20 years. Mary Kelly was also murdered on his route to work, and the time frame in which she is estimated to have been killed matches his route, although the day she was killed was a holiday and he may have had the day off. Lechmere's family background is also similar to that of many serial killers. He grew up in a broken home before having never known his biological father, and he had 2 stepfathers, and his childhood was characterized by an instability of residents growing up in a series of different homes. In addition, his occupation as a meat cart driver would have allowed his blood-splattered appearance to escape suspicion. And Swedish journalist Christopher Holmgren believes that Lechmere may have been responsible for several other murders in addition to those of the canonical 5 victims and Martha Tabram. So on we go. James Maybrick. James Maybrick was a Liverpool cotton merchant. His wife Florence was convicted of poisoning him with arsenic in a sensational and possibly unjust trial presided over by Sir James Fitzjames Stephen, the father of another modern suspect, James Kenneth Stephen. In her book, Jack the Ripper, The American Connection, author Shirley Harrison asserted James Maybrick was both Jack the Ripper and the servant girl annihilator of Austin, Texas. Of Austin, Texas. A diary purportedly by Maybrick, published in the 1890s by Michael Barrett, allegedly contains a confession to the Ripper murders. In 1995, Barrett confessed to writing the diary himself and described the process of counterfeiting the diary in detail. He swore under oath that he and his wife Anne had forged it, and Barrett, after their divorce, later denied forgery, and their story changed several times over the years. The diary was discredited by historians who pointed out to factual errors in relation to some of the crimes, and document experts pronounced the diary a fake. The handwriting does not match that of Maybrick's will. What else? In addition to the diary, a gentleman's pocket watch made around 1847 was presented by Albert Johnston in 1993. The inside cover of the watch has the inscription Jane Maybrick and the words "I am Jack" scratched into the inside cover alongside the initials. alongside the initials of Jack the Ripper's 5 canonical victims. Examination using electron microscopes by the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology and Bristol University. Where are we? Sorry, I've lost my track here. Examination using electron microscopes by the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology and Bristol University determined, based on aged brass flakes inside the scratches, that they likely predated discovery of both the watch and the diary, and therefore the idea of Maybrick as the Ripper by several decades and could potentially have been made in the late 1880s. So that's interesting. Joseph Barnett. Joseph was a former fish porter and victim of Mary Keller's lover from the 8th of April 1887 to the 30th of October 1888, when they quarrelled and separated after he lost his job and she returned to prostitution to make a living. Inspector Abilene questioned him for 4 hours after Kelly's murder, and his clothes were examined for bloodstains, but he was then released without charge. A century after the murders, author Bruce Paley proposed him as a suspect as Kelly's scorned or jealous lover, and he suggested that he committed the other murders to scare Kelly off the streets and out of prostitution. Other authors suggest that he killed Kelly only and mutilated the body to make it look like a Ripper murder, but Abilene's investigation appears to have exonerated him. Other acquaintances of Kelly put forward as her murderer included the landlord John McCarthy and former boyfriend Joseph Fleming. So, Jacob Levy. Jacob was born in Aldgate in 1856, and he followed in his father's trade as a butcher, and by 1888 he was living in Middlesex Street with his wife and children. Levy was a butcher with the necessary skills to remove certain organs from the victims, and was recorded as suffering from general paralysis of the insane. He, in his 1890 asylum records, report that he feels that if he is not restrained, he will do some violence to someone. Jacob Levy's life is featured on an episode of the podcast Bad Women, The Ripper Retold, where Jennifer Wallace, as a historian of medicine and psychiatry, comments that he's unlikely a person in Levy's condition would have been able to carry out serial murders and persistently conceal having done so. Right. Right, what have we got here? So Pepsi Pack is in the chat, and he's saying that City have won the Super Cup 5-4 on penalties, for those who are interested. That's interesting. So fair play to them. Another victory on the mantelpiece, as I say. Okay, so we're now going to talk about Thomas Catbush. In February 1894, the English newspaper The Sun ran a series of articles accusing Thomas Catbush of being responsible for the Jack the Ripper murders committed in London's East End. The public accusations did not give rise to the prosecution of criminal charges against Catbush, and the police hierarchies even defended him, dismissing Catbush as only being able to commit a single type of crime, that of picarism, a sexual interest in penetrating the skin of another person with sharp objects such as pins, razors, knives, etc. Sometimes this is serious enough to cause extreme injuries or even death, but not murder. Cutbush's most noted defender was Sir Melville Macnaghten, Chief Inspector of Scotland Yard. In a police memorandum, he emphatically rejected the idea that Catbush could be the killer. He then related the names of 3 other suspects, outlining the reasons that led him to believe that they were more plausible suspects to occupy the anonymous figure of Jack the Ripper. Now we move on to Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, otherwise known as Herman Webster Mudgett. So H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper were both serial killers during the late 19th century, and many people over the years have drawn comparisons between the two of them, and some have even suggested that they were one and the same. Jack the Ripper, the infamous serial killer, had a reign of terror, as we know, on the streets of the East End of London in 1888. His ruthless murders and unfortunate victims are still an unsolved mystery, and until today, the identity of the man still remains a mystery. H.H. Holmes was one of the first serial killers in American history. He skinned and mutilated his victims' bodies in his Illinois hotel, dubbed the Murder Castle, before dissolving the bodies in acid. Although his exact number of victims is not known, it is thought that he may have killed up to 200 people between 1893 and 1896, before he was eventually discovered, detained, and hanged. So if we compare the two of them, Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes, there's fairly widespread belief that H.H. Holmes could be Jack the Ripper, and there are a string of similarities and strange coincidences surrounding them. In fact, some historians have even gone on to say that these two individuals could even possibly be the same person, a theory that we'll explore in a little more detail later on. One of the most striking similarities between the two killers was the fact that both their victims were predominantly women, and in addition, both serial killers had clearly had psychotic tendencies and gruesome murder histories, a chilling combination. Also, another enduring theory is that regularly pops up in the Ripper case is that the suspect may have had some degree of medical knowledge or expertise. As it's said that the mutilations on his victims look like the work of a skilled doctor, and it is believed that Holmes used some medical methods to mutilate and dispose of the victims' bodies, which points towards another eerie similarity between Holmes and the Ripper. Many people believe Holmes was a qualified doctor, and the Ripper clearly possessed some medical or anatomical knowledge, which leads them to say there is a link between the two of them. Holmes also actually donated human skeletons to medical schools, who it was believed failed to find it strange that he had so many remains just laying around. Now, where are we? Yeah. Oh, here we are. So sorry about that. So Jeff Mudgett, who is H.H. Holmes' great-great-grandson, has gone on record saying that it believed that Holmes and Jack the Ripper were one and the same. And after the last Canonical 5 victim was murdered. He fled to the United States to dodge the British police. And it is also said the investigation to the Canonical 5 murders was aborted halfway, which helped Holmes to get back to business once again in Chicago. It's also claimed that Scotland Yard detectives visited the US in search of the Ripper as they became suspicious and they thought they may be hiding out in the New World. In order to support his claim, Mudgett submitted samples of handwritten text from both H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper for review. After close inspection, handwriting experts have confirmed that it is a likely possibility that the two samples could have been written by the same hand. Right, okay, so on we go. And Prince Albert Victor. Prince Albert Victor was mentioned in print as potential suspect when Philippe Julien's biography of his father, King Edward VII, was published in 1962. Julian made a passing reference to rumours that Prince Albert might have been responsible for the murders, though Julian did not detail the dates or sources of the rumour. It is possible that the rumour derived indirectly from Thomas E. Stowell. Where are we? Right. So Nicholson could have communicated Stowell's theory to Julian, and it was brought to major public attention in 1970 when an article by Stowell was published by the criminologist that revealed his suspicion that the prince had committed the murders after being driven mad by syphilis. But the suggestion was widely dismissed as Prince Albert Victor had strong alibis for the murders, and it is unlikely he suffered from syphilis. Stowell later denied implying that the prince was the Ripper, but efforts to investigate his claims further were hampered as Stowell was elderly and he died from natural causes just days after the publication of his article. Subsequent conspiracy theories, such as Stephen Knight in Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, have elaborated on the supposed involvement of Prince Albert Victor in the murders. Rather than implicate the prince directly, they claim that he secretly married and had a daughter with a Catholic shop assistant, and that Queen Victoria, British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury, his Freemason friends, and the Metropolitan Police conspired to murder anyone of the prince's supposed child. Many facts contradict this theory, and its originator, Joseph Gorman, also known as Joseph Sicard, later retracted the story and admitted to the press it was a hoax. But as we say in the UK, many true word is spoken in jest. So, guys, please make sure you subscribe to the Diesel Arsenal channel. Absolutely superb content. Is honestly, this guy, he can talk for hours and hours and hours, and he talks about very many different subjects. He talks about Arsenal Football Club. He talks about TVs and film. He talks about music. He talks about life in general. And he also has me come on here talking about conspiracy theories and the paranormal. So please also make sure you come and subscribe to Warren's Team Talk. I do a show every Saturday on YouTube where I follow all the goings-ons and all the drama that unfolds in the football up and down the country as it happens in the 3:00 kickoffs. That's always good fun, plenty of banter and good light-humoured fun. So make sure you come and check that out. So anyway, let's move on. So who was the Jack the Ripper? Let's see what my thoughts are. There are reportedly several theories who suggest that Jack the Ripper was actually more than one killer. Stephen Knight argued that the murders were conspiracy involving multiple people, whereas others have proposed that each murder was committed by unconnected individuals acting independently of each other, which, if true, would mean there never actually was a single Ripper at all. Whilst researching this story, I started to think that this theory may have some credence to it, and it may give an explanation as to why it was so difficult to find one single suspect who it could be proved without any doubt was responsible for the murders of the women who it claims were murdered by the mystical Jack the Ripper, and certainly not just the canonical 5, but some of the other 6 murders. It may also be that some of the murders may have been carried out by copycat killers. What their motivations for this is anyone's guess, but it does not happen with cases. It does happen with cases of serial killings or high-profile crimes which receive publicity in the media. The effect of a copycat crime is that there is a tendency of sensational publicity about the crimes, which may result in more of the same because the original crime is imitated. It can also result in increased hysteria and fear surrounding the crimes, and in fact, it is alleged that the phenomena first appeared in the early 20th century following the crimes which were inspired by Jack the Ripper. It is believed by criminologists that media coverage played a role in inspiring others with a tendency to commit such crimes to do so in a similar fashion, and even for others with no previous record for committing such crimes to begin doing so when they otherwise might have not done so. The belief is that the individual who commits the copycat crime may be inspired to commit the crime because of the hype of fame that comes with these crimes, and the 5 minutes of fame that is attached to the crimes then inspires others to commit such crimes. So, do I think that the murders have been linked to the mystical Jack the Ripper character could have been committed by multiple people? 100% I do. And it would certainly answer the problem that not one of the suspects seems to be fit the bill, and also why it seems to be so difficult to find the one single person who it can be proved beyond any doubt was the murderer. I also had a thought that maybe the Ripper murders were somehow connected to the phenomenon of body snatching, which was prevalent between the 16th and 19th centuries, so much so that relatives of those who had passed would commonly guard their loved ones' graves to prevent their bodies being removed. As I wondered whether Jack the Ripper, of those committing those murders, similar to those attributed to Jack the Ripper, were mutilating the victims' bodies to sell their organs and body parts to the medical profession who used them for research or teaching purposes. But after finding out that there was an Act of Parliament, where is it? Where are we? I've lost my place. Yeah. However, after discovering about the Act of Parliament and the Autonomy Act of 1832, which gave surgeons and their students legal access to bodies from workhouses, hospitals, and prisons that were unclaimed 48 hours after death, and also the possibility for a person to donate a next of kin's body for medical study. I sort of discounted this theory. I'm not convinced that it was because of that at all. So, who was Jack the Ripper? On the Jack the Ripper website, there was a poll published. Which shows who people thought was the most likely suspect to be the Ripper. The top of that poll was Aaron Kosminski. Second was Charles Lechmere Cross, and third was Jason Tumblety. You can look down and see all that if you'd like to. But for me, there are three big candidates. And these are H.H. Holmes, Francis Tumblety, and Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale. So let's have a look at this. Of these suspects, I think that Francis Tumblety, despite, in my opinion, being a strong candidate, is the least likely to be the Ripper. The main reason I believe this is because of the fact that experts seem to dismiss him as being a likely suspect because of the fact his appearance and age does not match the description of any of the men that were seen with the murder victims, and that he's relatively tall, high of at least 5'10", 1.78 meters tall. An enormous moustache would have made him particularly conspicuous. However, given the reason I've just given as to why I don't think he was the Ripper, there are, in my opinion, other minor, but I think he was a Ripper. But in my opinion, it would. Oh, sorry. And so, why I don't think he was a Ripper? The reasons are. Let me start this again. However, given the reasons I've just given as to why I don't think he was a Ripper, in my opinion, a minor, it would not surprise me if it came to light that he was, in fact, the culprit. Prince Albert Victor. So now let's look at Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence Avondale. I do not think this guy was a very plausible and strong suspect. When looking at the case of Prince Albert Victor, and feel it's important to remember the protection that the royals enjoyed from facing prosecution, which the rest of us don't enjoy. We just have to look at our royal family's recent history and see the privilege and protection that they enjoy in comparison to the rest of us. So, yeah, I'm not convinced about him entirely. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that just because Prince Albert Victor was a royal, he was definitely the Ripper. But at the same time, it also does not mean that he is not. So, what we have left is then Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, H.H. Holmes, and in Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes, we have two of the world's most notorious serial killers, though their modus operandi were different. One was based in London and the other was based in Chicago. Jack the Ripper is one of the most famous mysterious serial killers of all time. So the question is, and his brutal murder suddenly ceased, and a new Chicago-based serial killer, H.H. Holmes, was discovered after the height of Chicago's World Fair in 1893. So he stopped in London after the last canonical 5 victim was murdered, and then suddenly in 1893 another serial killer appears in Chicago. So the question is H.H. Holmes actually Jack the Ripper? The biggest indicator that H.H. Holmes is Jack the Ripper is that both of them had medical knowledge. Jack the Ripper was known for murdering prostitutes on the streets of London. However, violence towards sex workers was not uncommon in the late 1800s. The one thing that made Jack the Ripper's murder stand out is the way that he murdered his victims. So, The biggest issue with Holmes and the Ripper being the same psychopathic man is that one was in Chicago and the other in London at a time when international travel is not as easy as it is now. Back then, the way to travel between the UK and the US was by boat, which could take about a month. However, with the Ripper killings ending in early 1889 and the first Holmes killing at the end of 1889, the timeline is completely plausible. So, right, where were we? So, after reviewing all the evidence, I have one clear suspect in my mind, but I'm also mindful that it is possible that the other two candidates are extremely likely to be the murderer. I also think it is highly plausible that there was no Jack the Ripper and that the murders linked to Jack the Ripper were in fact carried out by a number of different people. So, if I had to pick one suspect who is most likely to be Jack the Ripper, I would say that that person would be boom, 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 Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. Sorry. That person. That being said, I feel that the cases against Prince Albert Victor and Francis Tumblety are very strong as well. As is the theory, there was lots of different people who were responsible for those murders. However, I have to say I'm very baffled by this one. I'm very intrigued by the Prince Albert Victor case. The idea that one of the world's greatest and most famous serial killers was a member of the royal family is shocking for me, and it just adds another element of intrigue to that family, and it's checkered, putting it diplomatically, history. Please put in the comment section what you think, because I'm genuinely interested to hear your thoughts on this one. So please let me know what you think. Which one was it? Who was the murderer? What do you think? So this evening, we've discussed a number of issues, which were why is Jack the Ripper so famous? London in the 19th century, poverty in Whitechapel, where the name Jack the Ripper came from, the victim profile, the murders, the canonical five, the hallmarks of the Jack the Ripper murder, the victims, the investigation, the offender profile of Jack the Ripper, the suspects, my thoughts, and I've unveiled who I think the Ripper was. So thanks to everyone for watching. Please make sure you put a like on the video and to subscribe to Diesel's channel if you haven't done so already. And please remember to take care of yourselves, all your families and friends and loved ones. And please remember, as I always say on these shows, keep your eyes on the skies and stay curious, everyone. Take care. God bless you all. And thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. God bless. Take care. And bye for now.
Oh, God.